Lord, please help us make it through the pass, I prayed as we flew along in the driving snow and falling light, just a few feet above the treetops, trying to maintain visibility with the terrain. In this case, the terrain was the Rocky Mountains just northeast of Prince George. We had flown to Prince George, which is on the western side of the Rockies, to bring our son Jim to a weekend hockey tournament. He was 11 years old. This was Sunday morning, November the 24th of 1974. We planned to fly back to Fort St. John in our old Piper Tri-Pacer, single-engine small plane, best suited only for flying in sunny weather. We flew along in almost whiteout conditions of driving snow, trying to find our way into and out of the Monkman Pass in northern British Columbia. Was that the pass, I wondered? No, watch out, because this is a dead-end canyon sloping up into higher and higher elevations. Turn around now. I put the plane into a sharp left stall turn to reverse direction and still maintain sight with the ground. Phew, that was close. Backtracking, I looked for another valley that might lead to the entrance to the pass. We had no de-icing equipment or modern navigation equipment, so it was really a seat-of-the-pants type of flight. I was good at it, but also much too willing to take a chance. Yes, there. Maybe that is the valley I need to follow. Looks about right on the map, and the several canyons we already passed. As I uttered the silent prayer, I seemed to have an incredible confidence that God was always with us and did not have any fear about proceeding deeper into the mountains in what proved to be virtually impossible weather. This formidable high mountain range runs from Alaska all the way down to Colorado. The occasion was a hockey tournament that young son Jim was playing in. He was good at it, and so the trip was important. I operated a radio communications business in Fort St. John with help of Al Adams, a young technician, and because I loved flying, used the airplane in that pursuit. Prevailing winds from the west had always to cross over this high mountain range, and in the process would drop their moisture on the western side, then becoming drier would have less rain or snow, as in our case on the eastern side. At least I hope so. I believed the weather reports, which indicated that if I could find a way across, I would get into slightly clearer weather with a wee bit higher ceiling. Where we were in the midst of the mountains, it was hellish, to say the least, with a combination of sleet and snow. My little plane was not certified to fly in these conditions, and neither was I qualified for instrument flying. However, it was not the first time for me to fly almost blind into such weather, so with not too much fear, I plunged on into the failing light. Earlier in the flight, I had flight planned to proceed through the Pine Pass, which is where the highway crossed the mountain range. The only way to go was by visual flight rules. But before we got very far out of Prince George, we ran into rain and then freezing rain. Knowing that the plane could not take much of the latter, I turned around and crept along the southwestern flank, hoping to find that elusive opening that would get me into the twisting route called the Monkman Pass. Well, this seems to be the pass, I said to myself when we flew along, and I checked off all the turns on the map. Many years later, I flew this route on a clear day down on the deck in my Cessna 310 twin-engine plane and could not believe how it was possible. I found the route back in 1974. By now, we were down to 300 feet above the trees and visibility about a quarter mile. Yes, that must be Monkman Lake. I should be able to see the entrance to the Murray River, which flowed out of it. But where is it? Stay over the trees so you have a reference. Well, there it is, I thought, as we zoomed on by with only a brief glimpse. Okay, do a 270-degree turn and come back lined up on the river entrance. Follow it carefully and it'll lead you out to slowly increasing ceiling until we get clear of the mountains. Uh-oh, I've lost sight of the ground, or what was now the frozen snow-covered surface of the lake. No reference, just all dim snowy white. Nothing to do but pull up and see what happens. There was no time for any more thinking because in the next instant all I heard was the gyros winding down and the ELT transmission coming through on the radio. The engine was silent, and I numbingly realized that we had crashed. My wife Carolee, who was sitting in the right-hand seat, was collapsed on the instrument panel. I pushed her back and saw the severe damage to her face. She was unconscious. Son Jim was in the back crying. saying, "Where's Stephen?" Stephen is our oldest. Knowing this was a desperate situation, since it was now getting dark at 4:30 in the afternoon, in spite of the trauma, I immediately went into survival mode and began to get us out of the plane. The windshield had broken out and snow was all over us. I stretched out my legs so I could undo my seatbelt, and it didn't feel right. I realized my ankles were broken, and also my right hand had difficulty to undo the clasp. It was broken. Now how to get out? Something seemed wrong with my mouth. I felt around and found that I had split my jaw. Now I had two mouths, filled with broken teeth and some jawbone splinters. The only door out of the front cockpit was on Carolee's, the right side. The snow is deep and we seem to be buried in it. The wheels are gone. Somehow I managed to open a door and pushed her out against the snow so I could get past her. Okay, get the survival gear out and make a bed. I helped Jim climb over the seat from the rear cockpit. He's calmed down, and now with his help we drag out a sleeping bag, engine cowl cover, and part of a parachute panel that I carried in case of a crash. Yeah. Take it over to where Carolee has collapsed in the snow and make a tent over the wing with the parachute panel. The wing now only about 2 feet above the deep snow. Okay, we are now able to lie down and shiver. It is dark, the wind is blowing, and there's nothing we can see except every now and then a vague dark outline indicating where the shoreline is. I estimated later that we were about a quarter mile from shore. It is cold, and since we came out of a warm plane, the snow melted on our clothes, and soon we were all very wet. I began to pray. Carolee was stirring and slowly began to regain consciousness, although she would go unconscious again several times. We lay there shivering in an indescribable way, shaking and vibrating so very hard. I thought I was mentally quite clear. I do remember that for a very brief instant I may have gone unconscious myself, although I only recall bouncing back off the instrument panel with no memory of the crash event itself. The Piper TriPacer has a rather severe and simple instrument panel with a very sharply defined upper edge. It was this that we both slammed into, having come to an almost instant stop from 100 miles an hour at about 50 feet. The propeller broke off and landed in the snow about 30 feet away. The fuselage crumpled in the strongest longitudinal mode as these structure tubes were bent. The flap cable snapped. The left wing collapsed down, but the right wing did not. Had it come down even a few inches, it would have prevented the right cabin door from opening, and we would have been trapped in the plane. I learned all this later from the accident investigator. The impact on the panel edge crushed Carolee's face, breaking her cheekbone, nose, jaw, and cracking her skull. Since I was taller, it struck me right on the lower jaw while breaking my nose, severing through to break out almost all my lower teeth and fracturing my jawbone, leaving a large gaping hole, which I now called my second mouth. I put my fingers in this hole and scraped out all the broken teeth and bone pieces. At this point, there was not much pain, but it came soon after. Jim, who, believe it or not, had been sleeping on the back seat. Something to be said there about trusting his dad, huh? He was thrown up against the left rear doorpost, gashing his forehead and wrenching his hip. So there we were, many miles away from civilization, in a spot so remote that to this day there is no access by road, only by hiking, float plane, or helicopter. So what does a day bring? Yes, it could have been fear, not knowing whether we may ever be found in time. It is dark and very cold, about 11 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 12 degrees Celsius. We were severely injured and bleeding, not a condition one might want to be in for a night. Knowing from Air Force training that a search would be initiated for us at first opportunity, I also knew that they would not know where to begin looking, since we were far off our previously filed flight notification, which said we were going by the highway. That was now at least 65 miles west of our position. I knew the ELT had activated as it was squealing so loudly over the new radio right after the engine became silent. Surely the search people would be able to hear it. Or wait a minute, maybe not, because by next day the battery would be dead. Now something else happens that cannot be explained easily. I had exceptional peace and confidence that we would be rescued. So I simply began to sing. What? Sing? When I think about it now, it must have been odd since I had in effect 2 mouths. Sing what, you might ask? Well, simple choruses and, of course, Amazing Grace. I was extremely aware of our status as being in God's hands, that He was looking after us, even though I was the one who caused the crash. So I just praised Him in whatever words and songs I could. I suddenly felt a warm sensation come over me. I shook my feet to see if there was any pain. They seemed to be all right and not flopping. I said to Carly and Jim, "I think the Lord has healed my feet." Then instantly I remembered something. A month before, after a church service in Fort St. John, while I was standing at the back ready to leave, the pastor's wife, Elaine Canet, came up to me and said, "Jim, I don't know if I had a dream or a vision, but I saw you sitting in a wheelchair. And then suddenly you jumped up and said, 'He's done it, he's done it, he's healed my feet.'" Now at that time I didn't know what to say because I was healthy as a horse and was so known for running around that my neighbor once said, "Don't you ever walk?" But it did stick in my mind, and I wondered what this might mean. I'm not very good at quoting scripture, but managed to remember the first part of Psalm 23. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Together, Carly and I would recite this as best we could between shivering, shaking, and consciousness. About 10:30 p.m., I suddenly heard the ice crack. When we crashed, we had struck the ice almost flat, but broke open a big hole, slid across, sheared off the undercarriage, and came to the sudden stop in a huge bank of pushed-up snow. Now I realized the water was overflowing the hole with the weight of the plane, and the ice was softening and would surely break open where we were now. What to do? It was a few years earlier, during a time in my life of soul-searching and trying to learn more about God, that I had the opportunity to talk to a pastor friend, Tom Lone. I asked him what it meant to hear from God. Do people really hear God speak? If so, how does He speak? Tom carefully rehearsed some scripture stories and principles to clarify how and when God might speak. Essentially, it meant to me that yes, we can hear Him, that most likely He would be silent in our head or come at us right from written scripture, but in every case must come in agreement to God's written principles and with great peace. Okay then, Lord, I need to hear from you right now. Should we get up and try to walk to shore, or should we stay here? If we stay, we may end up in the water and possibly drown, or at minimum freeze to death. If we try to walk in our broken condition, we may also freeze out on the ice, get lost, and be buried in snow where no one will ever find us. Almost instantly, as clearly as I can hear someone speak, in my mind, I heard him say, "Jim, get up and walk." There was no doubt, no second guessing. I would obey. So I simply said, "Okay, we got to walk to shore." Now that was going to be a challenge at this time of night and with our injuries. How do you do it? Well, I got Carly on her feet, which she discovered she also had an injured ankle. I put the portable ELT in her purse, and then I placed a sleeping bag over her head along with the cowl cover. Not good. It hurt her too much with the weight. So I just pointed her toward the dark outline, which was barely discernible through the driving snow, and said, "Try and walk that way." She felt she could not do it. And then this verse came to her mind. "But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." She then struck out for the dark shoreline, at least a quarter mile away through the driving knee-high snow and almost total darkness. I tried to make a splint for my right leg, which was the worst one, using the tow bar and my belt. However, I could not do it as my hand was broken. So I tied the parachute panel around my waist, threw the bag and cowl cover over my head, and holding my trusty axe in my left hand and with my right arm around Jim's strong young shoulders, we set out. It was very difficult to walk in the deep snow. With broken ankles, broken hands, smashed jaw and nose, and shock, it was almost too much. I paced myself to take 10 steps and then lay down, gasping for breath. Trauma shock really takes the stuffing out of you. Jim would stand there patiently waiting, and no doubt struggling for energy himself. Then he would say, "Come on, Dad, get up." I would struggle to my feet under the burden of the bag and cowl cover and take another 10 paces and lay down again. This continued as we tried hard to stay on Carolee's tracks. However, the wind was blowing hard. It was so dark, and at one point we lost sight of her tracks. I asked Jim, "Slowly circle around me and see her tracks again." He found the indentations again, got me up, and on we proceeded. I had no idea how Carolee was doing, not even if she was headed in the right direction because of the dark and blowing snow. Eventually we came to the edge of the lake and into water under the snow. Laying down was out of the question, so I struggled to make it the last few steps, where we could see Carolee collapsed unconscious on the bank. She was and is an incredibly tough woman, and a city girl to boot. I was too exhausted to do anything, so I asked Jim to make us a spot to lie down in the bush along the edge of the lake. He tramped out a small bed, laid down the parachute panel, then the cowl cover, and finally a sleeping bag. He got Carolee awake and helped me move into the spot. And while Jim lay down on one side of her, I lay down on the other. At best we could do, we tried to cover up with the sleeping bag, but it was too small to cover up all adequately, so I was only covered on the lower body. Snow was falling, wind blowing, and tree debris coming down on us. There we lay shivering and in deep pain. Like we did under the wing of the plane, we prayed, sang, and tried to remember Scripture. All this time I was thinking about our situation, how foolish I had been to push on through terrible conditions and contemplating my faith and relationship with God. Believing that there is a purpose in everything we experience, I concluded that this was both an instruction for me and a test. Carolee and Jim were having their own lesson in faith and now tell their own testimony of miracles. I had the utmost confidence that we would be rescued soon, believing God always has good intentions for us. Talking for me was getting very difficult, as my mouth was too sore to move much. I do not recall sleeping, but it was a long night, so no doubt we did from time to time. I tried to make sure we moved our feet so we would not freeze up. At one point, Jim said he could not move his legs. I reached over to feel him and found his legs locked straight out. Placing my hand under his knees, I was able to break the lock and he could move again. Later in the night, I got up and tried to make a more comfortable bed since our feet were sort of jammed into a small pocket and hard to move. While rearranging the bedding, I scraped Carolee's congealed blood out of the cowl cover, as she had lost a lot of blood. Monday at daybreak, we could see the weather was about the same as Sunday. Nothing we could do but just lay there. Before I pointed Carolee in the direction of the shore, I had placed the ELT for her to carry in her purse. Because she had fallen down several times in the struggle to shore, everything had fallen out of her purse except that rather heavy ELT radio. Imagine losing all your lipstick, wallet, Kleenex and stuff, but not the heavy radio. Miraculous. She has no recollection of carrying the purse. Now I tried to keep the ELT warm so that I could activate it if we heard a plane fly over. Unbeknownst to us, that night a Canadian Pacific aircraft flying from Fort St. John to Vancouver picked up our ELT signal and reported it to the control center. This started a search procedure by the Search and Rescue Squadron out of Comox, BC. They flew into Prince George and then began a high-level overflight of our general area to try and pinpoint where we were. Whenever I heard the overhead search plane, I would activate the portable unit, not knowing if the fixed unit in the plane was still working. An RCMP aircraft was called in to do a low-level, under-the-weather sweep of the area. Unfortunately, because the weather was down to the treetops like the day before, he had to follow the Murray River in towards Monkman Lake, on which we were now hidden in the trees. About noon, I heard the RCMP Beaver come onto the lake, flown by Sergeant Gary MacGyver. He flew around the lake edge trying to see where the ELT signal was coming from. Visibility was very poor, so not spotting anything, he flew back out again. Soon he came back in, no doubt hearing my portable ELT signal again. This time as he went around the lake, he swung over the center, and I could see him swoop down low to the ice, where he could just see a hump in the snow, which was our now almost buried wreck. With that, he left our area. I knew that he would report finding the crash site, and we could expect a rescue helicopter to come in to do a search for us. By now it was coming towards the end of another day. We were all exhausted, feeling almost frozen stiff, not able to say much, and slowly entering a quiet state. I was getting concerned about the approach of darkness, and not sure Carolee would survive another night. So I changed my prayer a bit and said, "Lord, please send that helicopter." I was fading in and out of sleep when Carolee said, "I hear a copter." Yes, now I could hear it too, and a flood of relief hit me, believing we would now get rescued. Oh no, he's hovering over the wreck, but there's no indication of light there. Slowly he flies over to the edge of the lake in a position about 90 degrees to us and began a slow search along the lake shore. Good. But what if in the dull light he doesn't see us, covered up by snow and in the trees? He only has one time for a sweep, and we'll have to get back out of the mountains as it's getting dark. You better get up and show yourself at the edge of the lake. With difficulty, I got up and staggered to the edge and waved my arms. Praise the Lord, he instantly spotted us and flew over, hanging over my head about 100 feet and raising up a terrible snowstorm. Being very cold and stiff, I tried to get him to back off by lifting my collar and turning my back. He tried to land on the ice, but the heavy Labrador helicopter broke through the soft ice. Up he went again and held his position, looking down at us. I crawled back into our bedding and lay there watching. The pilot waved to me, and I waved back. The co-pilot waved, and I waved again. I'm thinking, hey guys, enough of the waving. Soon down came a rope, and then a rescue medic slid down the rope. He crawled up to us and asked if everyone was okay. I could not speak much, simply pointed to Jim and Carolee. He radioed up to the pilot and told him that we were all alive. Now another medic came down and followed by a stretcher. They bundled up Jim and winched him up. Next they bundled up Carolee, wrapping her securely tied into the stretcher, and winched her vertically up too. Down it came for me, but they didn't have a regular bag, just a mummy-type bag. Being bigger and very stiff, they had to slip the bag open to get me in. All the down feathers came out and stuck to the blood over my chest, so I must have looked a sight, all blood and feathers. I told them I wanted my favorite axe and bedding, but they refused to bring them. Oh, once on board, they cut the rope and lifted away, leaving me on the floor because there was no room on a rack. Away we flew, threading our way back by the same route I had made coming in from Prince George. But this helicopter, I said to myself, so they can slow down if necessary to find their way out through the darkness. I do not recall very much of the flight. Next, remember lying on a cot in the Prince George ER, with a nurse attempting to cut off my jacket and cowboy boots. I objected strongly and asked her to cut down the boot seams so I could later have them sewn back up. She also pulled off my jacket. I did have the boots resewn, but never wore them again. Carolee and Jim were on cots next to me, having their clothing cut off, and all of us were wrapped in warm-up blankets to get our body temperatures back up to normal. I could see that God was still monitoring us, because along came a Catholic priest. Coming to Carolee, he prophesied that God was going to heal her completely and do a quick work. Remarkably, although they had to re-break their first attempt at fixing her face, when she left the hospital weeks later, Dr. Brian Foley, the plastic surgeon, said he had never had a patient heal so quickly. My doctor sewed up my jaw wound and splinted my right ankle, which was broken free, whereas the left ankle was only cracked. He didn't seem too interested to do anything about my broken hand or nose, but I asked him to splint the hand as well, which he did. Today it only has a small bump where the bones rejoined. My ankle was the limiting problem, along with the loss of blood. I recall once when they first attempted to have me try to walk, I could not stand steady. The doc pulled down one eyelid and said, "Give him some more blood." Because of the rescue was a result of finding us via the ELT, and this had only recently become mandatory, it became a national news item. We had people as far as Nova Scotia send cards to us. Our hospital rooms were so filled with flowers and cards, it reminded me of a funeral home. At one point, they put Carolee and me in the same room, totally surrounded with flowers. Jim was released first, and a friend put him on a plane back to Fort St. John, where he was greeted by a crowd, including all the hockey team and parents. Remarkably, when I got home, suffering from very painful restoration of nerves, which were severely frostbitten and could not stand to have anything touching my feet, an older man, whom I did not know yet, but who, being a firm believer and living on a communal ranch at which I was known, heard God say to him, "Go to Fort St. John and take care of Jim." Carolee was still recovering in hospital with her jaws wired shut, able only to suck through a straw. Can you imagine not being able to open your mouth or clear your mouth for over a month, only breathing through your nose? Ouch. Later, I had mouth surgery in Edmonton, where my gums were rebuilt to accommodate a plate. At that time, I operated a radio communications business. My ankles recovered so well that 6 months after the crash, I built a 150-foot radio tower, standing on the rungs of the tower and bolting on the sections as they were pulled up by groundman Al Adams, without coming down for 6 hours. My feet were made whole again, as the pastor's wife said. Today, these many years later, I still walk on ankles that were predicted to be immobilized in 5 years due to no cartilage. My right ankle is arthritic, but only sends me notice when I first get up. During the time of recovery, Al took excellent care of the business. He did not like climbing towers at first, although he had to do a lot of it later. He used to say he used a 3-finger method. I only have 3 fingers loose at any one time. Jim recovered totally and has become assured of God's care and love for him too. Carolee recovered totally in spite of having had cerebral fluid leak out while lying in the snow. The only reminder is a tear duct that occasionally needs clearing out, and a small dimple near her nose. But that's their story to tell. It seems she got a refill of fluid, because today her mind is sharper than mine. The crash incident has always been an event that colors many things in our lives to this day. Because of some unknowns about what all took place, 17 years later we took a trip to the Comox RCF base on Vancouver Island, hoping to see the rescue aircraft and learn anything we could about our search event. A young SAR tech was assigned to show us around, and after showing us the Labrador and the Buffalo aircraft, not the same ones of course, he walked us back into the hangar. A sergeant was at the long table folding up a parachute. Our guide introduced us and mentioned that we had been one of the fortunate clients. The sergeant looked up and said, "Was that Monkman Lake?" Nothing had been mentioned about where the accident rescue took place, but it seemed he was somewhat inspired, because he began to tell us about the whole sequence of the event, even though it took place about 17 years earlier. Sergeant Jerry Boucher was one of the SAR techs that slid down the rope and rigged us into the stretchers, winching us up from a reluctant deathbed. He had been in the Buffalo twin-engine Air Force rescue aircraft trying to pin down our location from the emergency locator transmissions coming from our radios. They landed back in Prince George, and realizing it was soon to be dark and our rescue was in jeopardy, he convinced the Labrador helicopter crew to make one attempt at rescue that day. Bless you, Jerry. He jumped in the Labrador, and they slowly wove their way back into the mountains at low altitude under the Scud to get to our transmission spot on the lake. They were totally surprised to find us alive, since the wreck was now embedded in the ice, having sunk to the top of the wings. Jerry was later transferred to Nova Scotia and served there for several years. Now he had been transferred back to Comox and was due for retirement discharge in another month. Had we'd been a month later in our decision to check Comox out, we would have missed the wonderful opportunity to talk to our rescuer. Very recently, we happened to meet Jane, an elderly lady here in Sherwood Park, and after telling her about her accident, she suddenly said, "I was a stewardess on the CP Air flight from Fort St. John to Vancouver, overflying the crash area. We heard your ELT and reported it to Vancouver Control." How incredible is that? I can only testify that God is real, His love is great, and we are blessed.